Microsoft made its Security Copilot generally available on April 1st, 2024. Despite that date, it was not an April Fool's gag, if you were wondering. Since then, customers and partners have struggled to understand how this product is packaged, licensed, and priced. This year, Microsoft is expected to add another wrinkle by rolling out various Security Copilot agents. It seems like now is a good time to take the pulse on one of Microsoft's marquee copilots, Security Copilot, which we are going to do in today's episode. Welcome to the Directions on Microsoft podcast. I am Mary Jo Foley, the editor-in-chief here at Directions. I'm your host for the series of podcasts for those interested in the Microsoft Enterprise IT ecosystem. Today, I'm joined by two security experts, our special guest beaming in from Scotland, Campbell, and Directions analyst Wes Miller. Rue is a Microsoft Security MVP, Most Valuable Professional. He specializes in Entra, Defender, Purview, and Intune. He also leads the Microsoft consultancy practice at Threatscape and is an organizer of the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance User Group. He is the co-author of the book Mastering Microsoft 365 Defender. Wes covers Microsoft security, identity management, and systems management technologies here at Directions. He also previously worked at Microsoft as a program manager in the Windows Core Operating System division and for Winternals Software, which was acquired by Microsoft in 2006. Wes just wrote an updated report for our members at Directions all about Security Copilot. Hi, both. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having us.
Very excited to have you guys. I feel like Security Copilot is something we talked about a lot when it was first introduced, and now we don't talk about it that much. So I think it would be good to start out by talking a little bit about what Security Copilot is and what it isn't. What similarities does it have with Microsoft's other copilots, if any, and how is it different from them? Rue, would you like to start here?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And maybe before I get into that, I'll agree with you in terms of feels like a lot of the hype around Security Copilot kind of died off after last year.
Yeah.
Starting to come back because of things that we could talk about later. But when I think of it compared to other copilots, main things that come to mind are similarities is the obvious one, as leveraging that OpenAI partnership, uses OpenAI based models such as 4o. Similarity with something like Microsoft 365 Copilot, insofar as you can experience it in multiple ways. You can experiencing it either as a dedicated chat interface at securitycopilot.microsoft.com, or experiencing it as an embedded type of interface across other admin centers, such as the Defender portal or the Entra portal. Similar to how with Microsoft 365 Copilot, you might experience that in other apps like Excel and Outlook. And I guess the big difference is going to be the billing model, right? That's really different than something like Microsoft 365 Copilot, and that's something we can dig into as we go on this discussion.
Yeah, definitely. Wes, what do you think on that?
Well, great explanation. I think one of the other things I would really highlight is that, so if you look at Microsoft 365 Copilot as a knowledge worker facing Copilot, then Security Copilot is it's facing a knowledge worker, but that knowledge worker tends to be either, as we'll talk about, someone at one of several different tiers in security, but there's someone operating with security or security related tools, as we can talk about, because like Ruth said, this has expanded from just being security to expanding the perimeter into the other security affiliated technologies like Purview, like Intune, and it's continuing to go even further than that in the portals of each one of those.
Okay, that's good. I'm still a little confused about this. Who is the target audience for Security Copilot? I've seen some people say it's for security newbies, like it's going to help people who aren't very experienced in analyzing these kinds of attacks that are happening to figure things out more quickly. But then I've also seen some people say, no, it's for the experts because it helps them do their job more quickly. Maybe it's both. What do you guys think, Rue?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the answer is both as the target audience. There's, like a lot of things in the generative AI hype cycle, there's this belief that, hey, it will eliminate the ability to have to hire entry-level folks because the AI can do it. That's really not what we're seeing across the industry, but we're certainly not seeing it with Security Copilot. It's not going to replace the need for that tier one security analyst, but hey, it might speed them up if it does what it says on the tin. But it will speed them up through capabilities that are developed by more experienced folks. So as an example, it has a capability called prompt books, where if you have a security incident, you can automatically run a series of prompts sequentially. And that type of thing, to know what you will build in a prompt book, that needs someone a little bit more senior with a little bit more experience under their belt. So it's targeting both those levels of seniority. That said, over time, just like the wider AI question, I do see it lowering the skill level for general IT and security ops folks in Microsoft 365, right? Insofar as 365, especially in areas such as Entra and Purview, such a highly skilled tool set to master. And if Microsoft can, over time, nail this right, lower those barriers for entries, there's a big opportunity there. But as we'll maybe talk about, maybe not quite hitting the nail on the head so far.
Okay. Wes, anything to add?
No, the only thing I would add in there as well is agreeing with the fact that it's so targeted at both tiers. There's some pieces that seem very clearly targeted at the entry level, but like prompt books, it's a great example, something really targeted at the higher level employee, because they have to understand, what is this thing even I'm starting to use here? I don't understand what it does. And so I sort of think of this Copilot and many of them as more of an accelerator. And unfortunately, a lot of the press really grabbed a hold of LLMs as a whole, but also grabbed a hold of the robust family of copilots that you and I've spent so much time talking about. And they've taken that idea, and instead of saying it's an accelerator that makes your employees more efficient, they've turned it into this really not a great idea of removing X employees because this technology is in place. And I think that that falls into the mythical man month kind of space, which is beyond today's conversation.
I was even confused at the beginning whether Security Copilot at one point was supposed to be proactive and not just reactive. And whenever I asked Microsoft, they were kind of giving me a wishy-washy answer. And I'm like, maybe they don't know where they're going to expand it next. But I think a lot of the initial talk about Security Copilot was just so high level that it was really hard, if you weren't a security expert, to know what was real and what wasn't, right?
Agreed. Frankly, even if you were a security expert, at times it became hard to know what was real and wasn't in that obligatory AI hype cycle. And that's why when it kind of first got released, the best way you could separate the marketing from the reality was, hey, just jump in and play with it and understand it yourself.
Right. Okay. So when Microsoft first started rolling out Security Copilot, it lit up in the Defender XDR portal, but now there are all these different plugins that integrate Security Copilot with other products like Defender, Threat Intelligence, Entra, Intune, Purview, like you guys have mentioned, and there are even some third-party plugins for it now too. So I'm curious if you think this model and the way Microsoft's going about rolling this out makes sense. And are there any additional integrations that aren't there yet that you think should be there? What do you think, Rue?
Great question. I think the details probably need ironed out, as does some of the quality. But as a general model of this integration across the different parts of really what's the Microsoft security organization, right? Entra, Intune, Purview, and Defender being the core pillars. I think the model makes sense. And as does third-party plugins. You guys have been covering Microsoft for so long, and you've been in the trenches for so long, that you know that Microsoft is such a partner-focused organization that Copilot leans itself very naturally to that, especially in cybersecurity. So that all makes sense as a business model. Where it needs to head is deeper levels of integrations within those existing platforms that it does support. Like I can give you a very obvious example where the Entra capabilities are so limited at the minute that there's kind of like 5, 6 specific use cases that it supports. Everything else is unsupported. That's not where the product needs to be, but over time we can see it getting there.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing I find interesting about it is I love the spirit of it, the idea of it, the plugins,
Yes.
really trying to take advantage. In fact, I've sort of jokingly referred to it within Directions through as infrastructure copilot, just because it's doing Intune tasks faster, doing Entra tasks faster. And yes, they're again security adjacent, or as you said, in the security family. And I think as to your question, Mary Jo, I think does that make sense? Yes, that makes sense. Microsoft, however, in classic form documentation, especially in 2025, they used to have a great documentation team, and not to say the Learn people aren't great, but when you're operating at this kind of velocity, it's hard to document. So that's, I think, the biggest shortcoming of Security Copilot, probably both for partners as well, if we're not developing for it, but just for the customer and analyst perspective, understanding what this thing does is almost impossible. You really have to sit down and tear it apart, which is, of course, why we exist. But that shouldn't have to be the case to this degree. And that's where I think Microsoft could really improve is documentation that really ties together the Security Copilot story. Otherwise, we're going to have to wait till Rue comes out with a book.
Is he writing one? Is he going to give us a scoop?
No
I wouldn't blame him. It's just such a gap, but it's a little early.
All right. Let's take a break instead of me putting Rue on the spot, so I can talk about Directions on Microsoft's new and improved online platform, Atlas, which is now officially up and running. Atlas hosts our in-depth analyst reports on Microsoft Enterprise technology and licensing, our up-to-date and powerful infographics and roadmaps, and it gives you a centralized way to register for our webinars and our licensing boot camps. If you are already a Directions member, you've already been automatically upgraded to Atlas. And if you're not yet a member, you can still check out our blogs and podcasts, which are open to all if you go to directionsonmicrosoft.com/blogs and directionsonmicrosoft.com/podcasts. While you're on the new site, which is directionsonmicrosoft.com, feel free to do a search or even two, so you can have a sneak peek of all the great Microsoft Enterprise technology and licensing content to which our members have access. If you want to learn more about all the content and services we offer, go to directionsonmicrosoft.com/membership. All right, back to co-piloting Security Copilot with Rue and Wes. Okay, Rue, we're going to talk now about how we kind of discovered that you were all over Security Copilot. In May 2024, you started blogging and tweeting about your initial thoughts about Security Copilot. And you were actually one of the very first people I saw trying to figure out Microsoft's arcane security compute unit pricing. Everybody else was just like, I don't know, I give up. This is too confusing. I can't figure it out. So I would love it if you could talk a little bit about what you've experienced and learned about SCUs since then.
Sure. It's really something that when I describe what an SCU is to customers, I kind of describe it as an abstracted compute cost, where it's billed as an Azure resource. So similarly to how folks may pay per hour for a virtual machine to be available, they would purchase for these secure compute units to be available. Last I checked, that's $4 per hour per SCU. And where it gets a little bit more, it gets abstracted even further, and really where the big challenge for adoption is okay, I pay in this currency called an SCU, and that's how I consume Copilot prompts. It's how I will probably consume agentic AI. But the predictability of that is, for customers I talk to, other partners I talk to, that's number one challenge, insofar as, hey, you could run a proof of concept for a week or a month and understand what your overall SCU use likes. But what if you then have an incident and all of a sudden the demand for secure compute units goes up? So that pricing certainty is a big challenge for a lot of customers. And then they have introduced some new capabilities to make it easier. So there's this new concept of the overage secure compute unit where, hey, you've got what you're going to commit to, but then if you run out and you need some more on demand as a kind of burst capacity, you pay $6 instead of $4. And just so that folks kind of get an understanding of what an average cost may look like for a customer using Security Copilot, Microsoft's recommendation would be that you run 3 SCUs nonstop. So over the course of a year, that's just north of $100,000. So that's not the kind of price that is to be sniffed at, right? That's even if you were to run a minimum of 1 SCU for an entire year, you'd be talking about $35,000, which is not inconsequential, right? So for that reason, the barrier, and to me, the standard to which you have to hold Copilot is really high, because at that level of cost, frankly, you're talking the level of cost that could cover hiring someone, outsourcing someone. So, it's serious money here.
Right. And I think depending on the size of your staff, that's, we're talking about it benefits different tiers, and it benefits depending on, how busy your staff is, how much staff you have, how technical they are. So there's all these questions, and known unknowns are really big in this case. And, for me, I initially thought about the idea of, well, we'll just do, spin it up and do it purely on demand. But of course, then they added the overage SCUs for $6. So they specifically priced it in such a way to try and deter you from doing only on demand, and to again focus in on just run it for maybe 1, 2, 3, get it started. But then we fall into the problem with the cloud paradox, as I like to call it. You don't know how much something costs to run in the cloud until you've run it in the cloud for a month. Then you know. And in the case of Security Copilot, I don't know if that's a fair comparison, because to Ruth's point, with the SCUs, you don't know, have I hit a bottleneck or not? And then I'm going to run into overages, and then it's going to be even more expensive than I expected.
Also, I don't know if this is an easy thing to answer, but I was curious how, when you license it, how many of your people have to be licensed for it? Because I know in other Copilots, that's an issue. Like if somebody looks at something, do they need a license, or does it actually require them interacting with it? And I don't know if that applies here or doesn't apply.
Well, that's what makes it fun. It doesn't apply.
Okay.
It's got this model instead. So instead of it pricing with Microsoft 365 Copilot, they use the user-based pricing to pass along that cost, like Rue was talking about. You're passing along the compute cost. That's what all of these Copilots are, and why they're not free beyond the one that's buried deep in Bing. And so besides that one, you have to pay for that compute cost somehow. And here it's through these SCUs. So it's abstracted, but it's not abstracted as much as it is in Microsoft 365 Copilot, where they've made it a much friendlier per user model, and it's a lot easier to figure out how much it costs. Rue, you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And certainly in the customer discussions I've had, that difference in modeling, where, hey, you're paying for this just like any other Azure resource hourly, versus known pricing per month. That's the biggest challenge that we're kind of facing in terms of adoption of it. And, improvements have been made. So as an example, at the time of launch, if you were a managed security company, so if you're an MSSP and you track security incidents on behalf of other companies, you would have to have that company's Azure billing process the secure compute units, right? So if I'm charging you to manage your security, oh, and by the way, and I'm also just going to need you to sort this Azure invoice out for me as well, that wasn't a very smooth experience. It's now more integrated with Azure Lighthouse, so you can manage that on behalf of your customers. But, geez, I am still long-term reasonably skeptical about SCUs being the best model for this.
Right. I definitely think a per user model, which could be done in this case, and in fact, it would make a lot more sense. I think it would benefit their adoption, but I think in particular, that the pass through that Rue just mentioned is really important, because I think those, if you know what Lighthouse is, first of all, then if you're a security partner in that space and you're using Lighthouse to help your customers already, those are the people who I think actually will find the efficiencies en masse with Security Copilot. And as long as this thing does use the SCU pricing model, they're Microsoft's greatest hope.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so let's talk now about what's supposedly the next act for Security Copilot. As is true for many, if not all, of Microsoft's copilots, it's agents, right? Everything's agents, agents, agents now. And there are already announced a handful of Security Copilot agents that are in preview. There are things like data loss prevention, triaging, insider risk management analysis. There's a whole bunch of other ones. So do you think this is an inevitable direction, a good direction? Do you think this will help customers better utilize Security Copilot? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I can jump in straight with that and say, in terms of, do I think it's the future and the general direction of Copilot? 100%.
Yeah.
Insofar as, when I first wrote that detailed blog about my own experiences in the early days of Security Copilot, one of those blogs that I was like, do I really want to publish this? This might ruffle a few feathers, because, I was honest about my experience. And I don't feel that chat-based style of interaction was, honestly, I didn't feel I was getting a good return on my investment.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the kind of things I think you mentioned earlier, Mary, was the point that when Security Copilot was first revealed, it's like, well, is this a proactive tool or is this a reactive tool?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly at the time of launch, it was a reactive tool, right? It helped you summarize incidents. It helped you jump into a chat interface and ask it stuff. This move to agentic AI with Security Copilot agents, that's what makes it proactive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, to me, the real value might start being experienced by customers, because you're lowering that skill barrier, or you're lowering the point of skill required to, hey, I don't have to go away and design big, complicated Power automations or PowerShell scripts that help me stay on top of gaps in my security protection. I can lay out the level of protection I want in Copilot Agentic AI as a principle, and hey, it's not perfect yet, but as an idea, it can take care of that thing for me. So I, just kind of to give my own personal experience and opinion of this, I was so skeptical of Security Copilot for so long, but over the last few months, when I've seen and I've played with things like the conditional access gap analyzer agent, that for me was a real turning point where I'm like, oh, okay, there's a lot of promise here. And I'm kind of getting that vibe from my customers as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think when we started with the sort of, if you think of the original implementation for the year and a half as a more of a proactive, you had to take initiative to do this, or sorry, more of a reactive thing you had to do. And then you think about the agentic approach, then we're getting into proactive. And I think that's where also partners will have the opportunity to make Security Copilot shine and increase adoption. But they're also going to really highlight the problem with SCUs. But agentic AI, I think, is actually, it would be much harder to try and refine into a per user model for Security Copilot. So I don't ever see them shifting to that, or at least I doubt that they'll shift to that. But as long as they're running with SCUs, the biggest problem you'll run into is that same figuring out the cost model. And with agentic, understanding how much it costs when you've deployed, 1 agent, 5 agents, 10 agents, and they're all different. They all do different things. So they all have potentially a different load. It's going to take some understanding. We might get to the point where when there's enough customers using this, there's enough insight in terms of a specific agent across 10 customers. Here's what it takes to do, here's what this thing uses in terms of compute. So who knows, we might see something offered up in the documentation from the actual partner in that case. But I think we're going to see the cost model becoming another objection along the way to agentic. But I love the potential of it from a technical perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, wait, they haven't announced pricing yet because these agents aren't ready. They're not GA yet, but I'm guessing we can assume they're going to cost something, right? And like you said, we don't know the model, but it's definitely not going to be free. Not going to be part of the base price, right?
Right. Well, there's
Yeah,
going to probably be the price for the agents themselves, and then they're going to burn SCUs. Rue?
Right.
yeah. No, just to echo that, pricing hasn't been confirmed in the billing model. We're still in that preview stage. The preview itself isn't even widely available, so I think we're quite a while away from even Microsoft themselves knowing how this is going to be priced.
Okay. All right. So anything else either of you would like to share about Security Copilot that we haven't touched on that you think could help our listeners? Anybody?
Rue?
Yeah, sure. The first one, and maybe the only one that really comes to mind for me, is it the SEU model, which obviously we've kind of we've dragged through the coal in this podcast.
It deserves it
For
though.
well, for all its faults, the bottom line is, hey, if you have a trial Azure tenant and you've got those free credits, you
Mhm.
can spin up one SEU and play about with it yourself, right? It's just there, and you can jump in and you can experience Copilot for yourself and kick the tires on it. So, kind of like Wes said earlier in this podcast, where there's so much marketing, what would you say, vagueness around the specific details of what you can and can't do with Copilot. The real best way is just go away and play with it yourself.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good capture of it. It's you have to work with it in order to understand what it can do, because the documentation just leaves a little bit to be desired. And I think this is a problem with a lot of the co-pilots right now, that it's hard to figure out what does this thing do. And part of the challenge is it doesn't sit still in terms of functionality. So what it does today is different from what it did at the beginning of May, and you have to constantly keep up with that. So that's a challenge for the IT pro, and it's also, I think, going to be a challenge for Microsoft, because it's a hard sell when people can't put their hand down and say, actually, what I'm looking at in order to assess, is this thing worth my time to even use, let alone pay for. So that's, I think, its biggest challenge in front of it. We'll see how it goes.
Right. I feel like the demos we see of all these things too are very like, demoware, right? So you don't even know if can it really do the thing they're showing me in the demo. That was very much the case with Microsoft 365 Copilot when that came out. So yeah, I'm sure it's the same here too.
I think
It
most of
is,
their
yeah.
demos are pretty fair.
Are they really? Okay.
Yeah, with Security Copilot, I don't think they've really stretched it thin as they
That's
have
good.
with some of the LLM based stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I do see a lot of instances of demoware insofar as the demo is very prescribed paint by number stuff.
Mhm.
And if you deviate from the script of the demo, hey, it might not respond well. I can give you one example where just today I asked it a very simple prompt. I said, hey, can you show me the list of users who have Microsoft Authenticator set up for MFA? Give me a list of their UPNs. And it timed out after 5 minutes, timed out again when I retried for 5 minutes, and still charged me some SEUs for that. So, I guess part of it does become, you have to really, and this is true for a lot of AI things,
Mhm.
you have to begin to understand, well, what prompts does this platform like and not like? That's a big, ironically, learning curve, right? As far as this reduces some learning curve, but it adds additional ones. But my ultimate conclusion with Copilot Security, long term, hugely optimistic, like massively optimistic. I'm all in on it long term. Short term, I really just would encourage customers to understand potentially the opportunity cost of it, right?
Mhm.
As we've discussed, this is not a cheap platform to run, and maybe that funding could be spent elsewhere in terms of providing better security bang for your buck.
And
Right.
Microsoft's messaging is really excited, so it's
Yeah,
they
that's
definitely
true.
want you to give it a try right now. But we're still so early in agents. I think I would say wait and see a little bit.
Yeah. Good call, both of you. Well, thank you both again for coming on the podcast today. That was great.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Good to chat with you guys.
All right. I would like to remind our listeners they can find lots more coverage of all things Microsoft related on directionsonmicrosoft.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions, comments, or any topics that you would like to hear the Directions analyst or guests cover in one of these podcasts, please do not hesitate to contact me via X or Blue Sky. Directions on Microsoft also is on LinkedIn, as are a number of our analysts, so make sure you follow us there. We at Directions have converged our existing social media channels into a single new platform. So give us a follow at Directions MSFT on X or Directions on Microsoft on Blue Sky for all the latest Microsoft Enterprise product and licensing information. Thanks again.